The Burt Lancaster investigation, separating fact from fiction. I spent weeks investigating the explosive claims about Burt Lancaster's secret gay relationships. What I discovered wasn't just that the stories lack substantiation. It's how these posthumous allegations reveal the documented machinery that controlled every aspect of stars' lives. We're diving deep into the story of Burt and Stephen Lancaster, the circus acrobat turned Hollywood powerhouse who commanded the screen in From Here to Eternity, mesmerized audiences as the charismatic preacher in Elmer Gantry, and captivated viewers as the unforgettable convict in Birdman of Alcatraz. His public image was meticulously crafted, masculine perfection that made him one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. But after Lancaster passed away in 1994, different stories started surfacing, not from Lancaster himself, but from whispered allegations and posthumous claims that have swirled around his memory for 3 decades. These aren't just gossip columns rumors. We're talking about explosive, unverified stories involving secret relationships with some of Hollywood's most famous leading men, emerging from a world where such relationships could have meant instant career annihilation. This isn't simply celebrity gossip. It's an investigation into the hidden machinery of Hollywood's golden age, examining the rumors, the documented exploitation, and the system of control that shaped every aspect of stars' lives. What we're about to uncover reveals facts about how Hollywood's power structure operated, and why certain stories only emerge when their subjects can no longer defend themselves. The manufactured masculine icon. To understand why these posthumous rumors about Burt Lancaster feel so earth-shattering, you need to grasp the true nature of the system that created and controlled stars like him. During Hollywood's so-called golden age, roughly the 1920s through the 1960s, actors weren't just performers. They were human commodities, manufactured products whose every breath was monitored, controlled, and exploited by a system designed to extract maximum profit while maintaining absolute power. Lancaster's origin story reads like American mythology. Born November 2, 1913, in East Harlem, New York, to working-class Irish-American parents, his father a postal worker, his mother a homemaker, young Burt learned early that physical strength was often the difference between surviving and becoming a victim in his tough neighborhood. This hard-earned toughness would become both his ticket to stardom and his psychological armor against an industry that devoured the vulnerable. At 9, Lancaster met Nick Cravat at a settlement house, beginning a partnership that would define his early life. Together, they developed the acrobatic act Lang and Cravat, performing in circuses and vaudeville theaters across the country. This circus background gave Lancaster the explosive physical presence that would become his trademark. But more importantly, it exposed him to a world that existed outside conventional social boundaries. Circus life operated by different rules. Performers formed their own communities with their own codes, creating intense bonds that often defied traditional categories. They were society's outsiders who relied on each other for survival. This experience may have shaped Lancaster's later comfort with people who lived outside mainstream expectations, a trait that would later fuel speculation about his personal relationships. When talent scouts discovered Lancaster and fast-tracked him to Hollywood stardom with his explosive 1946 debut in The Killers, the studios immediately recognized what they had: the ultimate embodiment of American masculinity. Tall, powerfully built, with those piercing blue eyes and a smile that could charm or menace, depending on the role, Lancaster represented the kind of masculine ideal that could sell tickets and fantasies to an entire generation. But creating and maintaining this image required the full apparatus of the studio system's control machinery. The most powerful weapon in their arsenal was the infamous morality clause that appeared in every major studio contract. The original language, introduced by Universal Studios in 1921 following the Fatty Arbuckle scandal, was deliberately vague and all-encompassing. The actor agrees to conduct himself with due regard to public conventions and morals, and agrees that he will not do or commit anything tending to degrade him in society or bring him into public hatred, contempt, scorn, or ridicule. In the event that the actor violates any term or provision of this paragraph, then the Universal Film Manufacturing Company has the right to cancel and annul this contract. This contract language was a legal tool that functioned as comprehensive control. Studios could terminate careers for virtually any behavior they deemed inappropriate, not based on legal standards, but on the subjective whims of corporate executives. In an era when same-gender relationships were not only socially taboo, but criminally prosecuted in every state, any suggestion of such relationships was considered grounds for immediate professional destruction. The pressure created by this system was documented through multiple sources. Stars lived in a state of constant surveillance, surrounded by studio spies, masquerading as publicity agents, photographers, gossip columnists, and even fellow actors who might trade information for career advancement. Every social interaction was potentially dangerous, every friendship a possible source of blackmail material. Lancaster's documented marriages tell the story of a man navigating this treacherous landscape while trying to maintain some semblance of authentic relationships. His first marriage to June Ernst connected him to his circus past. Ernst was a trapeze artist from a prominent performing family. His second marriage to Norma Anderson lasted 23 years and produced 4 children, representing his most significant long-term partnership. His final marriage to Susan Martin in 1990 came when he was 77 and in declining health. Throughout his career, Lancaster was known as an intense womanizer whose affairs were often conducted openly enough to create problems in his marriages. Kate Buford, his most thorough biographer, documented extensive evidence of passionate, tumultuous relationships with numerous women in the film industry. These relationships were real, documented, and frequently public, a pattern that contradicts the posthumous rumors about secret homosexual relationships. The dubious sources behind explosive claims. Before diving into the specific allegations about Lancaster's supposed secret relationships, we need to examine where these stories actually originate and why their sources are deeply problematic. The tale of Lancaster's alleged deathbed confession has circulated for decades, but when we investigate the evidence, we uncover a web of questionable sources, opportunistic storytellers, and medical impossibilities that challenge these claims as likely fabrications. Here's the medical reality that completely contradicts the confession narrative. On November 30th, 1990, while visiting a friend at an Alzheimer's care facility in Orange County, California, Lancaster suffered a massive stroke. The stroke left him with a severe right side paralysis and profound speech impairment. But the initial medical reports vastly understated the true severity of his condition. According to multiple biographical sources, Lancaster remained hospitalized until February 1991 and was incapacitated and unable to speak until his death in October 1994. Think about that. For nearly 4 years, the man who had commanded screens with his powerful voice was trapped in complete silence, unable to communicate even basic needs, let alone provide detailed confessions about alleged secret relationships. This medical reality makes any claim about a coherent deathbed confession, naming famous lovers not just implausible. It's medically impossible given someone who spent his final years unable to defend himself against any allegation someone might choose to make. So where do these persistent, detailed stories actually come from? The primary source is Scotty Bowers, a self-proclaimed pimp to the stars, who claimed to have arranged intimate encounters for dozens of Hollywood legends. Bowers' 2012 memoir, Full Service: My Adventures in Hollywood and the Secret Lives of the Stars, made explosive claims about numerous celebrities, including Lancaster, and became a bestseller largely because it told people what they wanted to hear about Hollywood's hidden secrets. But here's what fact-checkers discovered when they actually investigated Bowers' claims. He provided no photographic evidence of his alleged relationships with stars, despite claiming countless encounters over decades. He offered no correspondence, no documentation, no corroborating evidence of any kind beyond his own memory. His accounts contained factual errors about dates, locations, and biographical details that could be easily verified. Most damaging to Bowers' credibility, he claimed that Tennessee Williams was writing a biography of his life, which Williams allegedly destroyed at Bowers' request. However, researchers found no evidence of such a project in Williams' extensive archived papers at Columbia University, papers that meticulously document Williams' relationships and writing projects. The LA Daily Mirror's comprehensive fact-checking analysis revealed that Bauer's book contained numerous inconsistencies and unverifiable claims that suggest his accounts may be based more on decades-old gossip, wishful thinking, and deliberate fabrication than on actual memories of real events. Yet Bauer's stories have been widely accepted and repeated by people who want to believe them, regardless of their credibility problems. This reflects a pattern in how posthumous allegations function. Once someone can no longer defend themselves, any claim can gain traction if it confirms what people want to believe about hidden gay history in Hollywood. Another source, frequently cited, is declassified FBI files. But these documents reveal more about the Bureau's paranoid investigative methods than about Lancaster's actual behavior. The FBI investigated Lancaster for nearly 3 decades, primarily because of his political activities and suspected communist sympathies. The homosexual behavior allegations mentioned in the files appear to be based on unsubstantiated reports and investigative methods of the era, rather than verified evidence. A 1963 FBI memo mentions a raid on a millionaire and notorious homosexual's home, where Lancaster's name appeared in a guest book, along with other celebrities. But appearing at the same social gathering as closeted individuals doesn't constitute evidence of romantic relationships. It might simply indicate that Lancaster, as a liberal Hollywood figure, socialized in circles where such people felt safe. The Bureau's files from this period contain unverified reports collected from informants. During the McCarthy era, FBI investigations often relied on unsubstantiated information rather than verified evidence. The presence of these allegations in government documents can make them appear more credible than the evidence supports. Perhaps most significantly, Kate Buford, whose 2000 biography, Burt Lancaster, An American Life, remains the definitive scholarly work on the actor, had unprecedented access to Lancaster's personal papers, family cooperation, and private documents. Despite this extraordinary access to materials that other researchers could never see, Buford found no credible evidence supporting the rumors about secret homosexual relationships. Buford told reporters that Lancaster was a well-publicized womanizer, and rumors circulated that he was bisexual. I was unable to confirm or deny the rumors. This is a crucial admission from someone who had access to materials that would have revealed such relationships if they existed. Her conclusion that he was, in some way, pan-intimate appears to reflect his unconventional friendships and social circles rather than evidence of romantic relationships with men. Rock Hudson, the documented tragedy of studio system abuse. To understand why the Lancaster rumors have gained traction, we need to examine the real, documented stories of stars who actually lived secret lives during this era. Rock Hudson's story provides the most thoroughly documented and most tragic example of what closeted life actually looked like under the studio system's brutal control. Hudson's story begins with Henry Wilson, a talent agent who specialized in creating male pinup stars, while operating what can only be described as an organized exploitation ring. Wilson didn't just represent young actors, he systematically exploited them, using his position to coerce intimate encounters while crafting their public images as wholesome American heartthrobs. Wilson's business model was predatory in the extreme. He would discover attractive young men, often from working-class backgrounds with limited options, and promise them stardom in exchange for both professional and personal compliance. The young Rock Hudson, born Roy Harold Scherer Jr., was one of Wilson's most successful projects. But the cost of that success was a lifetime of psychological torment. Hudson's homosexuality is established through multiple credible sources. His own private acknowledgments to trusted friends, testimony from former romantic partners, his documented relationships within Hollywood's hidden community, and ultimately his passing from AIDS-related complications in 1985, making him one of the first major celebrities to face the disease publicly. The psychological abuse Hudson endured under the studio system was systematic and devastating. He was forced to participate in elaborate publicity campaigns that required him to discuss his supposed romantic interests in women, to engage in fake relationships with actresses, and to maintain the constant fiction that he was simply a confirmed bachelor who hadn't found the right woman. When Confidential magazine threatened to expose Hudson's private life in 1955, the response reveals just how ruthless and calculating the protection system could be. Wilson didn't just arrange Hudson's marriage to his own secretary, Phyllis Gates. He deliberately sacrificed two other clients, Tab Hunter and Rory Calhoun, by providing Confidential with damaging information about them instead. Think about the cold calculation involved in that decision. Wilson traded the careers and reputations of two human beings to protect his most valuable commodity. This demonstrates how people under this system were treated as expendable assets, whose personal lives could be bartered like commodities in a marketplace of mutual destruction. Hudson's 3-year marriage to Phyllis Gates was a performance of heterosexuality that required him to live intimately with someone while hiding his fundamental identity. Gates herself later suggested that she had been used in an elaborate deception, though she maintained publicly that their marriage was genuine, perhaps because admitting the truth would have revealed her own complicity in the system. The alleged connection between Lancaster and Hudson is supposed to have occurred in the early 1950s, during Hudson's rise to stardom. According to unverified sources, they met at Universal Studios and conducted a secret relationship in private locations away from studio surveillance. However, even Hudson's most intimate biographers and the testimony of those who knew him well don't include any mention of Lancaster as a significant figure in his private life. What's more likely is that Lancaster, as a liberal Hollywood figure who opposed the blacklist and supported marginalized communities, may have moved in social circles that provided safe spaces for closeted actors. Such friendships could easily be misinterpreted or mythologized over time, especially after all participants were no longer alive to clarify the nature of their relationships. Marlon Brando, the revolutionary who broke the silence. The most intriguing name associated with Lancaster rumors is Marlon Brando, whose approach to both acting and personal relationships was revolutionary for his era. Unlike other stars who lived in terror of exposure, Brando was remarkably candid about his experiences, making statements that would have destroyed other careers. In 1976, Brando told French journalist Gary Carey something that sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Homosexuality is so much in fashion, it no longer makes news. Like a large number of men, I too have had homosexual experiences, and I am not ashamed. This admission was revolutionary for its time and demonstrates a completely different approach to personal authenticity than the terror-driven secrecy that dominated most stars' lives. Brando represented a new type of masculinity, raw, emotional, and unashamed of vulnerability or unconventional behavior. His approach to relationships appeared to be as revolutionary as his approach to acting, rejecting the rigid categories and elaborate deceptions that the studio system demanded. The rumored relationship between Lancaster and Brando is described in various unverified sources as particularly volatile, reflecting their supposedly different approaches to both life and career. While Lancaster worked within the studio system to gain control over his projects, Brando openly rebelled against Hollywood conventions. Their alleged affair is portrayed as a clash between controlled masculinity and primal force, too intense to sustain long-term. However, even Brando's own admission of homosexual experiences doesn't provide evidence for a specific relationship with Lancaster. Brando was known for his extensive romantic history with both men and women, but detailed, credible accounts of his relationships don't include Lancaster as a significant partner. The connection appears to be based more on the appeal of linking two unconventional masculine icons than on actual documented evidence. Cary Grant and J. Edgar Hoover, the spectrum of alleged connections. The other names consistently mentioned in Lancaster rumors reveal the sophisticated understanding whoever created these stories had about Hollywood's hidden networks. Cary Grant's inclusion makes psychological sense because Grant's own private life has been the subject of decades of speculation, primarily centered on his documented 12-year cohabitation with fellow actor Randolph Scott. Grant and Scott's relationship has been extensively documented through hundreds of photographs published in fan magazines throughout the 1930s, showing them as domestic companions who entertained together, traveled together, and lived as a couple in all but official acknowledgement. However, even this extensively photographed relationship lacks definitive proof of romance versus an exceptionally close friendship or business arrangement. The alleged connection between Lancaster and Grant lacks even this level of documentation. Grant's biographical record shows him to be extremely cautious about personal relationships and deeply paranoid about publicity, characteristics that would make a secret affair with another major star psychologically implausible given the enormous risks involved. The most outlandish allegation connects Lancaster to J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director who spent decades investigating Lancaster for his liberal political activities. This claim is not just implausible. It's actively contradicted by documented evidence of hostility between the two men. Hoover's FBI maintained extensive files on Lancaster because they viewed him as a subversive threat. The Bureau's surveillance was documented as extensive, with Hoover personally denying Lancaster's 1957 request to tour FBI headquarters because of his subversive associations. The documented adversarial relationship between these two men contradicts claims of intimate contact. The machinery of control, how the studio system actually operated. The allegations surrounding Lancaster can't be understood without examining the sophisticated apparatus of surveillance, blackmail, and psychological manipulation that Hollywood studios developed to control their human assets. This system was far more extensive, invasive, and psychologically damaging than most people realize. A network of control that would make totalitarian regimes envious. The foundation of studio control was economic strangulation. Under the contract system that dominated Hollywood from the 1920s through the 1950s, actors signed multi-year exclusive deals that gave studios complete ownership over their professional lives. Stars couldn't choose their own projects, negotiate independent deals, or even control their public images. They were corporate property to be managed, exploited, and discarded when no longer profitable. But economic control was just the beginning. Studios developed extensive intelligence networks that would make intelligence agencies envious. Publicity departments employed private investigators to follow actors, photograph their activities, compile detailed reports on their behavior, and maintain files on every aspect of their personal lives. These investigators had access to hotel records, telephone conversations, bank statements, and private correspondence. Nothing was considered off-limits if it might affect a star's marketability or provide leverage for control. The major studios also cultivated corrupt relationships with police departments, district attorneys, judges, and prosecutors to ensure that any legal problems involving their stars could be quietly resolved. Arrests for everything from drunk driving to assault to more serious offenses could often be made to disappear with the right combination of money, influence, and threats about destroying careers and reputations. Perhaps most insidiously, studios created elaborate systems of psychological manipulation designed to keep stars dependent, compliant, and psychologically broken. They controlled not just actors' professional lives, but their personal relationships, living situations, medical care, and even access to their own families. Stars who showed signs of independence or rebellion could find themselves systematically isolated from friends, cut off from career opportunities, and subjected to campaigns of intimidation that would continue until they submitted or self-destructed. For actors whose personal lives didn't conform to studio-approved images, the system became particularly sadistic. Studios developed specialized techniques for managing homosexual stars that included forced heterosexual relationships, arranged marriages, elaborate publicity campaigns, and systematic psychological abuse designed to create self-hatred and compliance. The case of Rock Hudson demonstrates the extremes to which studios would go. When Confidential threatened exposure, Agent Henry Wilson didn't just arrange a fake marriage. He calculated exactly which of his other clients could be sacrificed to protect his most valuable asset. The deliberate destruction of Tab Hunter and Rory Calhoun's careers to protect Hudson reveals the cold, calculated cruelty that drove these decisions. This environment created what psychologists now recognize as classic symptoms of systematic abuse: hypervigilance, emotional numbing, dissociation, chronic anxiety, and often self-destructive behaviors, including alcoholism, substance abuse, and in some cases, suicide. The psychological toll of maintaining elaborate public facades while suppressing authentic selves was devastating. The system also created networks of complicity that extended far beyond the studios themselves. Gossip columnists like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons functioned as unofficial enforcers, using their platforms to reward compliant stars and destroy those who stepped out of line. Fan magazines participated in the deception by publishing carefully crafted fiction about stars' romantic lives that bore no resemblance to reality. Even other actors became part of the surveillance apparatus, as studios encouraged stars to report on each other's behavior in exchange for career protection or advancement. The communist investigations of the 1950s intensified this atmosphere of mutual surveillance and betrayal, as political loyalty became another aspect of behavior that needed to be monitored and controlled. For Lancaster, who was politically liberal and personally unconventional, this system presented documented challenges. His support for civil rights, opposition to McCarthyism, and friendships with blacklisted writers and directors put him at odds with the system's conservative power structure and made him a target for both studio retaliation and FBI investigation. Lancaster's response was to gain as much control as possible over his own career by forming his own production company, Hecht Hill Lancaster, in 1947. This was a revolutionary move that gave him unprecedented autonomy in choosing projects and controlling his image. But even this level of independence couldn't completely protect him from the gossip, speculation, and posthumous allegations that surrounded all major stars who lived through this system. The real Burt Lancaster, a complex portrait. To properly evaluate the persistent rumors about Lancaster's alleged secret relationships, we need to examine what is actually known about his documented life, relationships, and character. The real Lancaster, as revealed through credible biographical sources and verifiable evidence, presents a far more complex and ultimately more interesting picture than the sensationalized figure of gossip and speculation. Lancaster's personal relationships were marked by intensity, passion, and often considerable complexity. His documented affairs with women were numerous, well documented, and often conducted with little regard for discretion. Kate Buford's biography details relationships with actresses, including Shelley Winters, with whom he had a particularly passionate and tumultuous affair that began during filming of South Sea Woman in 1953 and continued intermittently for years. Winters wrote about their relationship in her autobiography, describing Lancaster as passionate but ultimately self-centered and emotionally unavailable, a pattern that emerged in multiple relationships with women colleagues throughout his career. These relationships were real, documented through correspondence, witness accounts, and often their impact on Lancaster's marriages. Lancaster's character combined contradictory elements that made him both compelling and difficult to understand. He was documented as capable of extraordinary loyalty and generosity, maintaining lifelong friendships with people from his circus days, providing financial support to friends and family members throughout his career, and standing by colleagues during the blacklist period, despite the professional consequences involved. His partnership with Nick Cravat, his circus partner who became a lifelong friend and frequent co-star, demonstrated his capacity for deep, lasting relationships that transcended professional considerations. Cravat appeared in numerous Lancaster films, often in non-speaking roles due to his heavy Bronx accent, but their friendship remained constant throughout Lancaster's career. At the same time, Lancaster was known for his volcanic temper, his need to control situations and people around him, and his tendency to compartmentalize different aspects of his life. Colleagues described him as someone who could be charming and intimidating, generous and manipulative, loyal and calculating, often within the same interaction. His political convictions were a defining aspect of his identity throughout his adult life. Lancaster supported civil rights, opposed McCarthyism, and used his influence and financial resources to support progressive causes, even when it presented career risks. His political activism included providing financial support to blacklisted writers and directors, using his production company to create opportunities for marginalized filmmakers, and maintaining his positions despite extensive FBI surveillance and industry pressure. Lancaster's approach to friendship was intense and often unconventional. He formed close relationships with a wide variety of people, including writers, directors, political activists, and other actors who shared his interests and values. These friendships often crossed traditional social boundaries and included people who were themselves marginalized or unconventional, a pattern that may have contributed to speculation about his private life. This pattern of forming friendships across social boundaries has contributed to the rumors about his private life. Lancaster appeared comfortable with people who lived outside mainstream society's expectations, including actors who were themselves closeted. His documented loyalty to friends during periods when association with suspected communists or known homosexuals could damage careers demonstrated his willingness to accept professional consequences for personal relationships. However, there's a crucial distinction between being an ally to marginalized communities and being a member of those communities. Lancaster's documented pattern of relationships with women, his 3 marriages, his reputation as a womanizer, and the testimony of those who knew him intimately all point to a primarily heterosexual orientation, regardless of whatever his friendships with closeted actors might have involved. Kate Buford, who had unprecedented access to Lancaster's personal papers, family cooperation, and private documents, found no credible evidence of romantic relationships with men. Her conclusion that he was in some way pan-intimate appears to reflect her observation of his unconventional friendships and his refusal to be bound by social conventions rather than evidence of actual homosexual relationships. The focus on the posthumous rumors about Lancaster is that they may obscure the more interesting and complex reality of who he actually was, someone who managed to maintain his integrity and independence in a system designed to control and exploit him, who formed deep relationships across social boundaries, and who used his power and influence to support causes and people he believed in, regardless of the personal cost. How posthumous allegations function in celebrity culture. The persistence of unverified stories about Lancaster's alleged relationships illustrates how rumors function in celebrity culture, particularly around subjects that were dangerous during a star's lifetime. Understanding the mechanics of how these stories develop, spread, and become accepted as historical fact reveals patterns in both Hollywood's hidden history and our contemporary relationship with celebrity mythology. Posthumous outing of historical figures has become increasingly common as society has become more accepting of LGBTQ+ identities. There's a natural and understandable desire to find representation and role models in periods when such visibility was impossible or dangerous. This impulse can be psychologically healthy and historically important, but it can also lead to the elevation of speculation and wishful thinking to the level of accepted historical fact. The Lancaster rumors follow a predictable pattern that appears in the similar stories about other stars of his era. A late-life confession that conveniently can't be verified because the subject is deceased or incapacitated. Relationships with men whose private lives are known, suspected, or the subject of their own speculation, lending credibility through association. Vague but dramatic details that sound plausible but can't be corroborated. And sources with serious credibility, problems who claim inside knowledge but provide no verifiable evidence. This pattern is so consistent across multiple alleged exposés that it suggests either a common source for these stories or a shared template that opportunistic storytellers use to create believable but unverifiable narratives that will find ready audiences among people who want to believe them. The role of figures like Scotty Bowers in propagating these stories deserves particular scrutiny. Bowers positioned himself as the keeper of Hollywood's most explosive secrets, claiming to have facilitated encounters for dozens of major stars while maintaining detailed knowledge of their private lives. His book became a bestseller precisely because it confirmed what many people wanted to believe about Hollywood's hidden history. But the fact-checking analysis reveals that Bauer's accounts often contradict documented facts about the stars he discusses, ignore established timelines and known relationships, and provide no corroborating evidence beyond his own claimed memories of events from decades past. More problematically, his stories often demonstrate sophisticated knowledge of gay Hollywood networks, combined with apparent fabrication about specific individuals, suggesting someone who moved in these circles but may have embellished or invented relationships for commercial or personal reasons. The FBI files that mention Lancaster provide another example of how unsubstantiated allegations can take on the appearance of official confirmation simply by appearing in government documents. But FBI files from the McCarthy era often contain unverified rumors, gossip, and guilt by association allegations, collected from informants with their own agendas rather than actual evidence of wrongdoing. The psychological appeal of these stories also reflects broader cultural attitudes about masculinity and authenticity. Lancaster represented a particular type of hypermasculine star whose image was built on physical strength, emotional control, and conventional masculine values. The idea that such a figure might have been secretly living a completely different reality creates a satisfying subversion of traditional masculine stereotypes and suggests hidden complexity beneath surface conformity. This appeal is enhanced by the genuinely tragic context of Hollywood's documented oppression of actors whose personal lives didn't conform to studio-approved images. The stories about Lancaster and others tap into authentic sympathy for the documented suffering caused by the studio system's systematic abuse, lending emotional weight and political significance to claims that might otherwise be dismissed as mere gossip. However, the elevation of unverified rumors to historical fact can be problematic for several important reasons. It can distort our understanding of the past by privileging sensational stories over documented evidence and careful analysis. It can be unfair to the individuals involved, who can no longer defend themselves against allegations they might have strongly disputed. Most importantly, it can obscure the real, documented stories of actors who actually did live through systematic oppression and whose genuine experiences deserve to be told accurately and respectfully. The focus on unverified rumors about straight or sexually ambiguous stars can divert attention from the documented struggles of actors like Rock Hudson, whose tragic story is well established, thoroughly documented, and deeply meaningful as a representation of the actual costs of the studio system's systematic abuse. The medical reality that destroys the confession narrative. The medical reality of Lancaster's final years provides the most compelling evidence against the alleged deathbed confession that forms the foundation of most rumors about his secret relationships. Understanding exactly what happened to Lancaster after his stroke in 1990 is crucial to evaluating the credibility of these posthumous claims and reveals how individuals have exploited a vulnerable person's medical condition to advance unverifiable stories. On November 30th, 1990, Lancaster was visiting a friend at the John Douglas French Center for Alzheimer's disease in Orange County when he experienced shortness of breath and collapsed. He was rushed to Los Alamitos Medical Center, where doctors determined that he had suffered a massive stroke affecting the left side of his brain, the area typically responsible for language processing and verbal communication in right-handed individuals. The initial medical reports suggested cautious optimism, with doctors stating that a full evaluation would take several days and that Lancaster's condition might improve with time and rehabilitation. His longtime friend and financial advisor, Jack M. Ostro, told reporters that doctors were hopeful and that Lancaster's spirits seemed fine given the circumstances. However, the reality proved far more severe than anyone initially understood. According to multiple biographical sources and medical reports, Lancaster remained hospitalized until February 1991 and was incapacitated and unable to speak until his death in October 1994. This wasn't a temporary condition that improved over time. It was a complete and permanent loss of verbal communication that lasted for nearly 4 years. The medical specifics are crucial to understanding why any claim about detailed verbal confessions is not just implausible, but medically impossible. Lancaster's stroke caused severe and lasting speech impairment combined with right side paralysis, indicating significant damage to language centers in his brain. Patients with this type of damage may retain some cognitive function, but lose the ability to express themselves verbally or process complex verbal information. Even if Lancaster had retained some cognitive awareness during his final years, the type of stroke that causes such severe, permanent speech impairment typically also affects other cognitive functions, including memory retrieval, information processing, and the ability to organize complex thoughts into coherent narratives. The idea that he could have provided detailed, accurate accounts of secret relationships from decades past is not supported by medical understanding of his condition. The timing of Lancaster's stroke also undermines other aspects of the confession narrative. By 1990, Lancaster had been married to Susan Martin and was living a relatively quiet life away from the Hollywood spotlight. If he had wanted to reveal long-held secrets about his past, he would have had numerous opportunities. During the 1980s, when he was still healthy, articulate, and capable of making such decisions deliberately. The fact that no credible source has ever claimed to have heard these confessions directly from Lancaster himself is also significant. All of the stories about his alleged revelations come from secondary or tertiary sources, people who claim to have heard the stories from others, or who suggest that Lancaster confided in intermediaries who then shared the information. This type of multi-level hearsay is inherently unreliable and impossible to verify. What makes these claims particularly problematic is that they involve a man who spent his final years in a vulnerable, incapacitated state, unable to communicate or defend himself against any allegation someone might choose to make. The willingness of certain individuals to attribute detailed confessions to someone who was medically incapable of making such statements represents exploitation of both Lancaster's condition and the public's desire for sensational revelations. Lancaster's wife, Susan Martin, and his children from previous marriages provided care and companionship during his final years, demonstrating the strength of the family relationships that sustained him through his most difficult period. The focus on manufactured scandals tends to diminish the significance of these documented relationships and the genuine love and support that surrounded him when he was most vulnerable. The uncomfortable truth about Hollywood's hidden networks. While the specific rumors about Lancaster remain unsubstantiated, the Hollywood of his era was indeed home to extensive networks of individuals forced to live secret lives under the constant threat of exposure and career destruction. Understanding these real documented stories and the systematic abuse that created them provides crucial context for evaluating the Lancaster allegations and reveals the true horror of the studio system's control mechanisms. The reality of closeted life in Golden Age Hollywood was far more complex and psychologically damaging than romantic myths about lavender marriages and secret affairs suggest. Stars forced to hide fundamental aspects of their identities lived in a state of constant psychological terror, knowing that exposure could result not just in career destruction, but in criminal prosecution, social ostracism, and complete personal annihilation. Rock Hudson's documented experience provides the clearest example of this systematic abuse. Hudson was essentially enslaved by a system that exploited his talent while forcing him to live a completely artificial existence. His agent, Henry Wilson, operated what can only be described as an organized exploitation ring, using his control over young actors' careers to coerce intimate compliance while crafting their public images as wholesome American ideals. The psychological strategies required for survival under this system were sophisticated and deeply damaging. Closeted actors learned to compartmentalize their lives completely, maintaining separate personas for public and private consumption that required constant vigilance and self-monitoring. They developed coded language, subtle signals, and elaborate security protocols that allowed them to identify potential allies and romantic partners without exposing themselves to dangerous scrutiny. Many turned to alcohol or substances to cope with the chronic stress of constant deception and self-denial. Others threw themselves into their work with obsessive intensity, using professional success as justification for the personal sacrifices they were making. Still others sought refuge in artistic, political, or intellectual communities that were more accepting of unconventional lifestyles, creating the liberal Hollywood circles where someone like Lancaster might have found trusted friends and allies. The lavender marriage phenomenon was widespread during this era, but these arrangements were often far more complex and psychologically costly than simple business relationships. Some involved genuine friendship and mutual support between individuals who found practical benefits in the arrangement. Others were purely transactional relationships that required the participants to live intimately while maintaining elaborate deceptions that never ended. The most successful lavender marriages often involved people who became genuine companions and life partners despite the absence of romantic love, creating complex relationships that provided emotional support while serving practical purposes. The least successful created additional layers of psychological stress and deception that compounded the already enormous pressure of living closeted lives. The social circles where closeted individuals could find temporary refuge were crucial to psychological survival, but they also created additional vulnerabilities. Private parties at the homes of trusted friends provided rare opportunities for authentic social interaction, but they also created concentrations of vulnerable people who could all be destroyed if the wrong person gained access or if security was compromised. These hidden networks were often multi-generational and included not just actors, but writers, directors, artists, wealthy patrons, and influential figures who provided protection and support. The networks crossed professional boundaries and created informal communities based on shared vulnerability and mutual protection rather than shared interests or backgrounds. It's in this context that any potential connection between Lancaster and these hidden networks should be understood. His documented political liberalism, his friendships with blacklisted writers and directors, his opposition to McCarthyism, and his apparent comfort with unconventional people put him in contact with communities that included many closeted individuals seeking allies and protection. Whether Lancaster participated in these networks as a member seeking to hide his own secrets or simply as an ally and friend to marginalized people, his presence in these circles could easily have been misinterpreted, mythologized, or deliberately misrepresented over time, especially after all the original participants were no longer alive to clarify the nature of their relationships. The final verdict: separating fact from fiction. After examining all available evidence surrounding the alleged secret list of Burt Lancaster's romantic partners, we're confronted with a story that reveals more about the machinery of posthumous myth-making than about Lancaster's actual private life. The investigation uncovers a web of questionable sources, medical impossibilities, and storytelling that exploits both Lancaster's legacy and the genuine suffering of those who actually lived through Hollywood's systematic oppression. The medical reality of Lancaster's final years, nearly 4 years of complete speech incapacitation following his devastating 1990 stroke, makes the narrative of detailed verbal confessions not just implausible, but medically impossible. The attribution of elaborate statements to a man who was physically incapable of making them represents exploitation of his vulnerable condition and the public's appetite for sensational revelations. The primary sources for these stories, particularly Scotty Bowers and other self-proclaimed Hollywood insiders, have serious credibility problems that become apparent under careful examination. The pattern of unverifiable claims, factual errors, lack of corroborating evidence, and reliance on decades-old memories suggests that these accounts may be based more on gossip, wishful thinking, and commercial motivation than on actual documented relationships. Kate Buford's authoritative biography, based on unprecedented access to Lancaster's personal papers, family cooperation, and private documents, found no credible evidence of romantic relationships with men. Her research revealed extensive documentation of Lancaster's passionate affairs with women colleagues, his complex but genuine marriages, and his role as a father to 5 children, all of which contradicts the posthumous rumors about secret homosexual relationships. The allegations about specific relationships with Cary Grant, Rock Hudson, Marlon Brando, and J. Edgar Hoover all lack credible supporting evidence and appear to have been constructed by connecting Lancaster to men who were themselves the subjects of speculation or documented relationships. While these stories demonstrate sophisticated knowledge of Hollywood's hidden networks, they don't constitute proof of Lancaster's participation in those networks as anything other than a friend and ally. However, this investigation has also revealed the genuine horror of the studio system's control mechanisms and the documented suffering of those who actually lived through systematic oppression. The real stories of actors like Rock Hudson, who endured decades of psychological abuse, forced relationships, and elaborate deceptions, deserve attention and respect rather than being overshadowed by unverifiable speculation about other figures. The studio system's morality clauses, surveillance networks, blackmail operations, and psychological manipulation created an environment of terror that affected everyone who lived and worked within it. The economic strangulation, invasive monitoring, corrupt legal arrangements, and systematic abuse that characterized this system represent one of the darkest chapters in American entertainment history. Lancaster's documented response to this system, forming his own production company, maintaining political independence, supporting blacklisted colleagues despite professional risks, and creating opportunities for marginalized filmmakers, represents a form of resistance that was both documented and practical. His ability to maintain personal integrity while achieving commercial success within such a system is documented and noteworthy. The persistence of unverified stories about Lancaster reflects our contemporary desire to find LGBTQ+ representation in historical periods when such visibility was impossible. This impulse is understandable and important, but it should be balanced against historical accuracy, respect for the individuals involved, and attention to the documented experiences of those who actually lived through systematic oppression. The elevation of speculation to accepted historical fact can distort our understanding of the past and be unfair to people who can no longer defend themselves against allegations they might have strongly disputed. More importantly, the focus on sensational rumors can obscure the more significant story of how institutional power was used to control, exploit, and abuse vulnerable individuals for commercial gain. Lancaster's actual legacy, his groundbreaking work as an actor and producer, his political activities during a contentious period, his complex but genuine personal relationships, and his success in maintaining independence within a system designed to destroy personal autonomy is substantial enough to stand without manufactured controversy. The real Burt Lancaster was complicated, flawed, and ultimately admirable in ways that transcend any speculation about his private life. Perhaps most importantly, this investigation reveals how posthumous allegations function as a form of exploitation that takes advantage of both deceased individuals who can no longer defend themselves and contemporary audiences who want to believe sensational stories about hidden histories. The responsibility to separate documented fact from profitable fiction becomes more important as the original participants in these stories pass away and can no longer provide their own accounts of their lives and relationships. The real tragedy isn't that some stars might have been forced to hide aspects of themselves. It's that an entire industry was built on surveillance, control, blackmail, and the systematic subordination of human dignity to commercial interests. Understanding this larger context is more important than perpetuating unverified stories about individual figures, no matter how appealing those stories might be to contemporary audiences seeking hidden representation or sensational revelations. In the end, Burt Lancaster remains fascinating not because of unsubstantiated rumors about secret relationships, but because of his documented achievement in navigating an impossible system while maintaining his integrity, supporting his beliefs, and creating art that continues to move audiences decades after his death. That's a legacy worth preserving and celebrating, regardless of whatever private relationships he may or may not have had during his remarkable life. So there you have it, the facts behind one of Hollywood's most persistent posthumous rumors. It turns out the real story about Lancaster's era isn't hidden relationships, but the documented machinery of control that dominated every aspect of stars' lives. The verified abuse, the systematic exploitation, the psychological terror, that's the scandal that actually shaped this industry. What other dark corners of Hollywood's golden age do you think deserve this kind of investigation? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the documented truths behind the glamour.